In the heart of Burkina Faso's sun-scorched Sahel, a rumor spread like wildfire. Captain Ibrahim Traore, the young military leader, had unleashed 1 million rabbits into the desert, not for sport, not for food, but for a purpose so audacious it baffled the world. Whispers of madness clashed with tales of genius. Was this a stunt, a symbol, or a strategy to reshape a nation? As the sand swallowed the story, one question lingered. Why would a man, hailed as a revolutionary, stake his reputation on such a bizarre act? The truth was stranger than anyone imagined. The story begins in Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso's bustling capital, in the autumn of 2022. Ibrahim Traore, a 37-year-old army captain, had just seized power in a military coup, the second in a year. The nation was reeling. Decades of instability, jihadist insurgencies, and crippling droughts had left it fractured. Traoré, with his sharp rhetoric and Pan-Africanist fire, promised a revolution. He wasn't just another strong man. He was a symbol of defiance against Western influence, vowing to reclaim Burkina Faso's destiny. His speeches electrified crowds, railing against neocolonialism and pledging self-sufficiency. But the desert, vast and unforgiving, loomed as his greatest challenge. Burkina Faso's Sahel region, a semi-arid expanse, was a graveyard of dreams. Crops withered, livestock perished, and communities clung to survival. Traoré's predecessors had tried aid programs, foreign loans, and irrigation schemes, but nothing stuck. The land was too harsh, the resources too scarce. Yet Traoré, barely a year into his rule, announced a plan so outlandish it sounded like folklore. In early 2025, he declared his government would release 1.2 million rabbits into the desert, not to hunt or farm them, but to heal the land. The world scoffed, but Traoré was undeterred. Step one of his plan was rooted in an unlikely inspiration: ecology. Traoré's advisors, a mix of local scientists and radical thinkers, had studied desertification, the creeping death of fertile land. They pointed to a forgotten principle. Small animals, like rabbits, could transform barren landscapes. Their burrowing aerates soil, their droppings fertilize it, and their grazing patterns disrupt encroaching desert grasses, allowing native plants to return. Traoré, ever the pragmatist, saw potential where others saw absurdity. If rabbits could revive the soil, they might unlock agriculture in a region where hunger was a constant shadow. The logistics were daunting. Step 2 involved sourcing the rabbits. Traoré's government partnered with local farmers and cooperatives, launching a nationwide breeding program. Villages were incentivized to raise rabbits, with the state providing feed and training. By mid-2024, millions of rabbits were ready, housed in makeshift pens across the country. The operation was chaotic. Farmers grumbled about costs, and skeptics mocked a rabbit army. But Traoré framed it as a people's project, a symbol of collective resilience. We will not wait for foreigners to save us, he declared at a rally. Our salvation lies in our hands and in our rabbits. Step 3 was the release itself. In January 2025, under the scorching Sahel sun, trucks rumbled into the desert, carrying crates of rabbits. Soldiers, farmers, and volunteers worked side by side, setting the animals free across designated zones. The sight was surreal. Waves of rabbits hopping across the dunes, disappearing into the vastness. Social media exploded with videos, some calling it a spectacle of hope, others a farce. Western media outlets sneered, branding Traoré a delusional populist. But in Burkina Faso, the mood was different. People sensed something bold, even if they didn't fully understand it. The plan's core, step 4, was long-term. Traoré's team calculated that the rabbits, prolific breeders, would multiply rapidly. Their burrows would break up hard, sun-baked soil, allowing rainwater to penetrate deeper. Their waste would enrich the ground, fostering microbial life. Over time, the desert would become a savanna again, supporting grasses, shrubs, and eventually crops. It wasn't just about rabbits. It was about restarting an ecosystem. Traoré's scientists cited studies from Australia and China, where similar experiments had shown promise. But scaling it to 1 million rabbits in the Sahel? That was uncharted territory. Critics were merciless. Step 5 was weathering the storm of doubt. Foreign analysts called it a publicity stunt. pointing to Traoré's flair for dramatic gestures. His alliance with Russia, cemented after ditching France, fueled conspiracy theories. Was this a Kremlin-backed ploy to distract from his authoritarian grip? At home, opposition leaders accused him of wasting resources while jihadist attacks continued in the north. Even some supporters wavered, questioning why he prioritized rabbits over immediate needs like security or food aid. Traoré doubled down, framing the criticism as proof of his enemy's short-sightedness. "They laugh now," he said in a televised address, "but they will eat their words when our deserts bloom." Step 6 was monitoring progress. Traoré's government deployed teams of ecologists and volunteers to track the rabbits' impact. Early reports were mixed. Some areas showed signs of soil improvement, with patches of green sprouting where rabbits had burrowed. But in others, the animals struggled, dying from heat or predators. The desert was no forgiving laboratory, and the experiment scale made data collection patchy. Traoré's team leaned heavily on satellite imagery and drone surveys, sharing grainy footage of greening patches to bolster public support. The narrative was clear. This was a marathon, not a sprint. The deeper truth, Step 7, lay in Traoré's motives. Beyond ecology, the rabbit plan was a political masterstroke. It galvanized his base, casting him as a visionary who dared to think differently. By rejecting Western aid models, he reinforced his anti-imperialist credentials. The rabbits became a symbol of Burkina Faso's defiance, much like his nationalization of gold mines or his pivot to Russia. Social media amplified the story, with AI-generated videos of global celebrities praising Traoré, later debunked as deep fakes. His cult of personality grew, even as dissenters were silenced, often with force. Step 8 was confronting the risks. Rabbits, if unchecked, could become a plague, devouring sparse vegetation and disrupting ecosystems. Traoré's advisors insisted they had modeled for this, planning controlled culls if needed. But the Sahel's fragility meant even small miscalculations could spiral. Water sources, already scarce, were strained by the rabbits' needs. Some communities grumbled as rabbits raided their meager crops. Traoré's response was to double down on community involvement, urging villagers to see the rabbits as allies, not pests. "They are our soldiers," he said, "fighting the desert for us." By mid-2025, Step 9 was assessing the fallout. The rabbit release had sparked global debate. Environmentalists praised its ambition, comparing it to rewilding projects in Europe. African leaders, wary of Traoré's rising star, watched closely. Some inspired, others threatened. The West, stung by his rejection of their influence, painted him as reckless. Yet in Burkina Faso, the mood was cautiously optimistic. Farmers in pilot zones reported better soil moisture, and some began planting experimental crops. The rabbits, for all their controversy, were starting to shift the narrative from despair to possibility. Step 10 was Traoré's gamble on legacy. He knew the rabbits alone wouldn't solve Burkina Faso's woes. Insurgency, poverty, and governance loomed large. But the project was a statement. Africa could innovate, defy, and dream big. Traoré wasn't just fighting the desert. He was fighting skepticism, dependency, and history itself. Whether the rabbits would green the Sahel or scatter into oblivion, he had already won a victory, capturing imaginations. As one farmer put it, "He gave us hope, even if it's just rabbits." The desert, silent but watching, held the final verdict. The Sahel stretched endlessly before Captain Ibrahim Traore, a sea of sand and secrets. His audacious release of 1 million rabbits into Burkina Faso's desert had sparked a global firestorm. Some called it madness, others a masterstroke. By mid-2025, the world was watching, waiting to see if his gamble would turn barren dunes into fertile fields or collapse into chaos. The rabbits were more than animals now. They were a symbol of a nation's defiance, a leader's vision, and a people's hope. But as the dust settled, the real test began. Could Traoré turn a wild idea into a lasting legacy? The first challenge was scale. Traoré's team had anticipated the rabbits would multiply, but the numbers were staggering. By late 2025, estimates suggested the population had doubled, with burrows dotting the Sahel like stars in a night sky. The animals were doing their job, churning soil, spreading nutrients, but they were also straining the fragile ecosystem. In some areas, rabbits overgrazed sparse vegetation, threatening the very balance Traoré sought to restore. His advisors scrambled to adjust, deploying teams to monitor high-density zones and introduce control culls. The optics were tricky. Culling the heroes of the desert risked alienating supporters. Meanwhile, the human element was just as complex. Traoré had sold the rabbit plan as a people's project, but not everyone was on board. In northern villages, where jihadist attacks were a daily fear, farmers grumbled about resources spent on rabbits instead of security. "We can't eat hope," one elder told a local radio station. Traoré responded with characteristic flair, touring affected regions in his military fatigues, shaking hands with farmers and promising results. He leaned on his charisma, framing the rabbits as a long-term weapon against hunger. "Give me time," he urged, "and we'll feed the nation." The science, though, was showing promise. In pilot zones, soil tests revealed improvements. Organic matter was up, and water retention had increased by 15% in some areas. Patches of green sprouted where rabbits had worked their magic, and hardy crops like millet were being tested. Traoré's government seized on these early wins, flooding social media with images of budding fields. The hashtag Rabbit Revolution trended across Africa, with young Burkina posting videos of themselves planting seeds in rabbit-tilled soil. But the successes were uneven. Some regions saw no change, and others reported rabbit carcasses baking under the sun. Internationally, Traoré's experiment was a lightning rod. Environmentalists lauded his boldness, with a UN report citing the project as a radical case study in combating desertification. But Western critics, still smarting from Burkina Faso's pivot to Russia, dismissed it as a populist stunt. A scathing BBC op-ed called a million rabbit distraction from authoritarianism. Traoré didn't blink. He invited African leaders to see the project firsthand, hosting a summit in Ouagadougou, where Mali and Niger's leaders praised his vision. "The West mocks us," he said, "because they fear our independence." Back home, Traoré faced a delicate balancing act. The rabbit plan was draining funds, and with the economy strained by sanctions and conflict, dissent was growing. Opposition groups, though suppressed, whispered of mismanagement. A leaked memo revealed internal debates within Traoré's circle. Some advisors urged scaling back, warning of ecological disaster. Rabbits, after all, weren't native to the Sahel, and their rapid spread raised fears of invasive damage. Traoré silenced the doubters, insisting the risks were calculated. "Revolutions aren't tidy," he told his inner circle. "We push forward." To keep the momentum, Traoré doubled down on community engagement. He launched a program training youth to monitor rabbit populations, turning them into desert guardians. Schools incorporated the project into curricula, teaching kids about ecology and resilience. The propaganda was relentless. Billboards showed Traoré with a rabbit in one hand, a rifle in the other, captioned, "Fighting for our future." It worked. Urban youth, especially, rallied behind him, seeing the rabbits as a middle finger to foreign skeptics. But rural communities battered by drought and violence needed more than symbols. They needed results. By early 2026, the project's fate hung in the balance. In the best-case zones, farmers reported bumper harvests of drought-resistant crops, crediting the rabbit soil work. One village near Dori became a poster child, its fields photographed for global media. But elsewhere, the dream faltered. Predators like jackals feasted on rabbits, and some burrows collapsed in sandstorms. Water scarcity remained a chokehold. Rabbits needed it as much as humans did. Traoré's team pivoted, drilling wells in key areas, but the costs were mounting. Whispers of corruption surfaced, with allegations that funds for wells were siphoned off. The final piece was Traoré's vision for the future. He wasn't just fighting desertification. He was building a narrative of African self-reliance. At a Pan-African conference, he pitched the rabbit model as exportable, urging neighbors to try it. "We are not victims," he declared, to roaring applause. "We are architects of our destiny." Behind the scenes, though, he was pragmatic, seeking Russian and Chinese investment to scale the project. The rabbits had become a geopolitical chess piece, a way to cement alliances while snubbing the West. As 2026 dawned, the Sahel was a patchwork of hope and hardship. The rabbits had changed the land, some for better, some for worse. Traoré's gamble had sparked a movement, but its success was fragile. He stood at a crossroads: scale up and risk collapse, or scale back and admit limits. For now, he chose defiance, betting on time to prove him right. The rabbits, bounding across the dunes, carried his dream, a Burkina Faso that could feed itself, free from foreign strings. Whether they deliver or devour that dream, only the desert knew. The Sahel sun beat down on Burkina Faso, casting long shadows over a land transformed by Ibrahim Traoré's audacious vision. By mid-2026, his million-rabbit gamble had become a global saga, part science, part spectacle, part rebellion. The desert, once a symbol of despair, now teemed with life, but the line between triumph and turmoil was razor-thin. Rabbits burrowed, crops sprouted, and Traoré's legend grew, yet whispers of failure and rebellion simmered. Could he hold the nation's faith, tame the desert, and silence the skeptics, or would his dreams scatter like sand in the wind? The experiment was at a tipping point. In the best zones, the rabbits had worked miracles. Near the town of Gorom Gorom, fields of sorghum and cowpea flourished, the soil enriched by rabbit burrows and droppings. Farmers who once mocked the plan now boasted of yields unseen in decades. Traoré's government plastered these success stories across social media, with drone footage of green patches going viral. The hashtag Sahel Reborn trended, and Traoré, ever the showman, toured these fields, shaking hands with farmers while cameras rolled. "This," he declared, "is the future we build ourselves." But the desert was a fickle ally. In other regions, the rabbits were a runaway train. Their numbers, now estimated at over 3 million, overwhelmed sparse vegetation in some areas, turning patches of scrub into dust. Predators couldn't keep up, and water sources dwindled as rabbits competed with livestock. Angry herders clashed with government monitors, accusing Traoré of prioritizing rabbits over people. In one village, a protest turned violent when soldiers seized rabbits to protect a local well. Traoré's critics pounced, branding the project a reckless fantasy. "He's turned our desert into a zoo," one opposition leader quipped. Traoré's response was bold but risky. He launched a nationwide campaign called Guardians of the Green, mobilizing thousands of young Burkinabe to manage the rabbit populations. Armed with traps and training, they culled excess rabbits while protecting key zones. The meat was distributed to hungry communities, a move Traoré framed as proof of the project's humanity. "Every rabbit serves the people," he said in a fiery speech. The campaign won hearts in urban centers, where you saw as a call to action, but rural skepticism lingered. Many saw the culls as an admission of failure. Globally, the rabbit saga was a lightning rod. African nations like Chad and Senegal sent delegations to study the project, intrigued by its potential. A viral ex-post from a Nigerian scientist praised Traoré as Africa's ecological revolutionary. But Western media doubled down on criticism, with a CNN report highlighting ecological risks and alleging human rights abuses in Traoré's crackdowns on dissent. His alliance with Russia fueled further suspicion, with rumors of Moscow funding the project to destabilize the region. Traoré shrugged it off, hosting Chinese investors to discuss scaling the model across the Sahel. The real battle was at home. Economic strain was mounting. Wells, monitoring teams, and rabbit feed weren't cheap. Sanctions from Western nations, angered by Traoré's defiance, squeezed the budget. Jihadist attacks in the north hadn't stopped, and some communities felt neglected. A leaked audio of a Traoré advisor admitting, "We underestimated the rabbits," sparked outrage. Yet Traoré's charisma held firm. He went live on radio, admitting setbacks but doubling down on the vision. "Revolutions are messy," he said, "but we're rewriting history." His base roared, doubters fumed. By late 2026, the Sahel was a mosaic of hope and chaos. Some 10,000 hectares showed signs of recovery, with grasses and trees returning. Farmers in these zones were Traoré's loudest cheerleaders, their livelihoods proof of his gamble. But elsewhere, overgrazing and water shortages fueled resentment. The rabbits, once a symbol of defiance, were now a test of governance. Traoré's team rolled out new measures: fencing off sensitive areas, introducing drought-resistant plants, and training more guardians. But the clock was ticking. Public patience was fraying, and whispers of a coup resurfaced. Traoré stood defiant, his eyes on the horizon. The rabbits had changed the Sahel, for better or worse, and with it, his legacy. He wasn't just fighting desertification. He was fighting for a Burkina Faso that could stand tall, free from foreign chains. At a rally, he held up a handful of fertile soil, letting it slip through his fingers. "This is our freedom," he said, voice booming. "We'll make the desert kneel." The crowd erupted, but the desert, vast and silent, held its secrets. Traoré's dream hung in the balance, carried on the backs of 1 million bounding rabbits. By early 2027, Burkina Faso Sahel was a battleground of hope and havoc. Ibrahim Traoré's million rabbit gamble had ignited a revolution. Fields bloomed in once barren lands, but chaos lurked where rabbits ran rampant. The world watched, captivated by a leader who dared to defy the desert itself. Traoré, with his steely gaze and unrelenting resolve, stood at the helm of a nation teetering between triumph and collapse. His vision was no longer just about soil. It was about proving Africa could rewrite its future. But as the rabbits multiplied, so did the stakes. The successes were undeniable. In key zones like Dori and Djibo, the Sahel was transforming. Rabbit burrows had turned hardpan into fertile ground, with millet and sorghum yields up 20% in some areas. Farmers who once scoffed now called Traoré a prophet, their harvest feeding families and markets. Social media buzzed with hashtag Sahel Reborn, showing kids planting trees in rabbit-tilled soil. Traoré's propaganda machine worked overtime, broadcasting these wins to counter the growing unrest. At a rally, he tossed seeds into a crowd, shouting, "This is our victory." The cheers were deafening, but not universal. The rabbits, now numbering over 5 million, were a double-edged sword. In uncontrolled zones, they devoured vegetation faster than it could regrow, turning patches of green into dust bowls. Water shortages worsened as rabbits competed with livestock and humans. In one village, herders torched a government outpost, furious over diverted wells. Traoré's guardians of the green struggled to keep up, their culls barely denting the population. Ex-posts from rural users raged. "Rabbits eat our future, while Traoré preaches." Opposition leaders, though censored, whispered of rebellion. Traoré's response was vintage defiance. He launched Phase 2, a high-stakes pivot to contain the chaos. His government rolled out mobile fencing units to protect recovering areas and introduced predator rewilding, releasing jackals and hawks to curb rabbit numbers. Chinese drones patrolled the skies, mapping progress, while Russian agronomists advised on soil recovery. The costs were astronomical, straining a sanctions-hit economy. Yet Traoré framed it as a war. "We fight the desert like we fight our enemies," he declared on state TV, his voice a mix of fire and grit. Urban youth rallied, but rural trust was eroding. Globally, the saga was a lightning rod. African leaders hailed Traoré as a trailblazer, with Mali testing its own rabbit program. But Western critics, led by France, called it ecological roulette, pointing to reports of localized desertification. A viral Al Jazeera documentary showcased both sides, lush fields and angry herders, cementing Traoré's polarizing status. At home, jihadist attacks flared, exploiting the chaos. Traoré's security crackdowns grew harsher, silencing dissent but fueling whispers of tyranny. The rabbits, once a symbol of hope, were now a test of his grip on power. As 2027 unfolded, the Sahel was a patchwork of dreams and disasters. Some 15,000 hectares showed recovery, but vast swaths remained at risk. Traoré's legacy hung on a knife's edge, hero or hubris. He bet everything on the rabbits, believing they'd prove Africa's resilience. At a dusty village meeting, he knelt beside a farmer, pointing to a sprouting shrub. "This is us," he said. "We rise from nothing." The desert, silent and vast, held the final word. Want to stay on top of Traoré's wild gamble and the stories shaping our world? Hit that subscribe button for Newsjolt, your go-to channel for gripping, unfiltered updates. Don't miss the next chapter. Join us now.